It was a dark and gloomy night at the sheds. Ivatt rolled in as silently as he could so not to disturb the other engines. He had been delayed to let the sleeper train overtake him, which in turn had been stopped by broken signals. It had just been one of those days. Ivatt was worn out, but alert. He wasn't afraid of the dark, but more afraid of what was in the dark. He never liked running passenger trains in the winter months. With so little light, it was inevitable that trains would run when the sun went down. The paraffin lamps would do little to light the way, and sometimes Ivatt felt as if he was running blind. But it was late summer, and Ivatt was looking forward to the sun rising early again, and with it came daylight. As the driver and fireman were finishing off for the night, Ivatt thought he heard something. It sounded like a growl. "Who's there?" asked Ivatt. "It's us, you daft engine," chuckled the fireman. "Oh, sorry," said Ivatt, a little confused. The driver backed Ivatt into the shed, and the two men left. Ivatt looked around the yards once more. There was nothing there. As he was about to close his eyes, the mysterious growl began again. Ivatt looked around nervously. Almost at once, the shed lights began to flicker. Ivatt gulped. He wanted to call for his driver and fireman, but his throat went dry, and he couldn't say anything. Suddenly the floodlights went off, and Ivatt was in total darkness. But still the strange noise continued. "Hello," squeaked Ivatt. The growls turned into a roar, and slithering past Ivatt were two deep red eyes. Ivatt held his breath and didn't say a word until they disappeared into the darkness. When the sun rose the next morning, Ivatt was still on his guard. He hadn't slept a wink throughout the night. Ivatt wanted to tell the other engines, but he was worried they'd all laugh at him. He knew all about ghost stories and supernatural occurrences that happened in the dead of night on the railways. All were told by old engines and veteran engine crews. But Ivatt couldn't put his buffers on it. It wasn't a ghost he saw. It was very much alive. As the engines began leaving for work, Ivatt felt very skittish. "Cor Ivatt, you look like you've seen a ghost," teased Terry. "Oh no, nothing of the sort," stuttered Ivatt, and he quickly raced away. "He's in a hurry," puffed Richard. "Must be eager to work." But Robin wasn't convinced and followed his friend to the station. When he got there, Ivatt was nowhere to be seen, and Robin began to worry. That evening, Ivatt sat in the sheds alone, trying desperately to go to sleep so not to see the dark figure in the night. Robin approached Ivatt. "What's wrong, Ivatt? Something's troubling you," he asked kindly. Ivatt looked around to check no one else could hear him. "I saw a... well, I don't know what it was, but it growled fiercely and had these awful red eyes," described Ivatt. Robin was taken aback. "A monster!" he cried. "Shh!" hissed Ivatt. But it was too late. Richard rolled in. He had heard everything. "A monster!" he exclaimed. "What a load of rubbish!" "It is a monster," huffed Ivatt. "I saw it. It was very frightening. It made the lights flicker when it left." Richard just laughed. Ivatt and Robin just ignored him. It wasn't long before Roger knew too. The twins began scaring the two engines with ghost stories. "You know what it really is," sniggered Roger. "It's the ghost of the cleaner that worked at this very engine shed." Robin gulped. The cleaner was made to do night shifts at the shed on his own during the war. He used to get very cross when engines returned home very late. The crews would sneak off home and he would have to clean and maintain the engines. He was a very grumpy man due to lack of sleep, and it played tricks with his judgment. One night during a blackout, an engine returned home late. As the crew slipped away, the fireman hadn't left the brake on properly. The cleaner didn't bother to look if the line was safe. The engine rolled towards him and crushed him. Robin was horrified. He still gets angry at engines that arrive late and growls at them. He gets so angry, his eyes glow red. He keeps engines awake at night, so when they're exhausted in the daytime, they're more likely to have an accident. That's how he gets his revenge, finished Roger. Roger's tale wasn't true, of course, and Ivatt knew that. He'd been at the sheds longer than Roger, and there was never talk about a ghost haunting the yards. Ivatt just ignored the story, but Robin and even Richard did believe in the tale, and were spooked. Robin, with a runaway imagination, couldn't stop thinking of what Roger had said. "Take no notice," soothed Ivatt. "Even I'm not scared by that pathetic story." "But how do you know if it's not the cleaner?" questioned Robin. Ivatt couldn't prove it, but still felt a little nervous to see if the red eyes would return. Later that night, when the engines were fast asleep, the growl returned. Robin immediately awoke. "Ivatt! Ivatt, it's here!" he whispered. The two engines watched as the elusive figure slipped away into the night. Robin was beyond words. Ivatt, on the other hand, wasn't as scared as he had been the night before. There must be an explanation to all this, he said to himself. The next morning, Ivatt challenged Roger's ghost story. He explained no one returned home late, but his theory was pushed aside when Roger pointed out that William had returned late. "I was delayed to let the sleeper train depart," explained William. "See, it is true," said Roger smugly. Richard felt very shaken up with the facts and darted away to the goods yard. "You don't believe that tall tale," snorted William. "No, I don't," puffed Ivatt. "But there was something last night, and I am going to find out what." At the station, Ivatt was looking for clues when seemingly a train departed on its own. Again Ivatt heard the familiar growl he heard at the sheds. In the distance was a horn. Ivatt smiled to himself. Just then Arthur rolled in. Arthur had been away for a while, and Ivatt was glad to see him. "Where have you been?" asked Ivatt. "Oh, I was away at cruise sheds, my dear boy," explained Arthur. "I've been palling the sleeper train for a couple of nights. Tiring work it is. Fortunately, they're testing a new locomotive on the sleeper train, so it gave me the opportunity to have a nice long rest." Ivatt bubbled with excitement. He was one step closer to solving the mystery. "And does this engine use our sheds at night?" quizzed Ivatt. "Oh, of course," said Arthur. "In fact, you just missed her. Lovely diesel locomotive she is. If all goes well, she may be a resident at our sheds." Ivatt cheered to himself. So that's what's making the growling sounds in the red eyes. Arthur was puzzled, but Ivatt explained everything. Ivatt made him promise not to tell anyone. The twins would be in for a surprise. That night, the engines were winding down and starting to relax. Just then Richard clanked in. He was still wondering about the ghost. "Where's Roger?" quivered Richard. Ivatt chuckled. "Oh, he's late, and you can bet on it the ghost won't like that." As Richard eased towards the sheds, there was a sudden growl, and a pair of red eyes glared at Richard. "The ghost!" he cried. Richard bumped into Roger. Both were very surprised. Out of the shed rolled a diesel engine, and there Arthur introduced her. "This is Barbara," announced Arthur. "She has been running the sleeper train while I have been having a rest." "This is our Phantom of the Rails," laughed Ivatt. "Oh, please," she smiled. "Call me Babs." "For a diesel, she's a classy bird," puffed Roger. "Did you just call her a bird?" sniffed William. Yes. What are you, a ruffian?" Babs laughed. "I'm sorry I scared some of you, but now I'm going to be living here. I hope we'll all be friends." The engine smiled. There was nothing to be afraid of, though the twins did feel a little foolish. Ivatt and Arthur were very pleased. They knew Babs would be a welcome addition to the sheds.